Sheck Exley was a legend in the world of extreme diving, a man who pushed beyond the boundaries of depth, darkness, and danger. But in 1994, his attempt to reach an unprecedented 1,000 feet in Mexico's Zacatón Sinkhole would turn into a deadly journey from which he'd never return. What unfolded in the depths of Zacaton would send shockwaves through the diving community and leave a legacy shadowed by tragedy. And before you continue, please be advised, some scenes may be unsettling. From the time he was a teenager, Sheck Exley was known as a diving prodigy in the Florida waters. By the age of 19, he had already built a name for himself within the tight-knit local dive community, impressing seasoned divers with his almost superhuman abilities. It wasn't just that Sheck was a skilled diver. His control and endurance were in a league of their own. Fellow divers would marvel at his ability to conserve air, stretching the life of his tanks far beyond what most could achieve. He could reach depths that left even the most experienced divers disoriented or dizzy from nitrogen narcosis, a dangerous side effect of deep diving. And at such a young age, it seemed he was just getting started. But on a seemingly ordinary day in 1968, Sheck's life took a tragic turn that would haunt him for years. He and his younger brother, Edward, had gone to Wakula Springs, a deep and mysterious spring known for its crystal clear waters and immense depth. The brothers were eager to test a new depth gauge without any scuba gear. It was a risky choice, as freediving, or diving without tanks, demanded every ounce of lung power and a whole lot of nerve. That day, Edward managed to descend 42 feet, a significant depth in its own right, but Sheck pushed further, reaching 50 feet on a single breath. Despite the lack of gear, they felt they had control. They were young, fearless, and probably believed nothing could go wrong. But Edward had other plans. He wasn't satisfied with stopping at 42 feet. Determined to reach deeper, he took several deep breaths at the surface, expanding his lungs as much as he could before plunging back down into the dark water. Sheck watched him go, perhaps with a sense of pride or maybe even worry, as his younger brother pushed his limits. Suddenly, something was wrong. Edward wasn't coming back up. Beneath the water, he had lost consciousness, his body slowly drifting down toward the bottom of the spring. Sheck didn't hesitate. He dove down after his brother, attempting rescue after rescue, each one more frantic than the last. On a single breath, he fought against the water's pull, grabbing hold of his brother and trying to bring him back to the surface. But freediving, without the help of tanks, meant he had a precious few seconds before his oxygen would run out. Despite Sheck's relentless attempts, Edward was slipping away. Another swimmer, seeing the commotion from above, quickly dove down to retrieve the brothers' diving gear, hoping it would somehow aid in the rescue. When Edward was finally pulled to the surface, his body was unresponsive. His face was pale against the blue of the spring. Someone started CPR, trying to breathe life back into him, and there was a flicker of hope as his lungs took in air once more. But the damage had been done. By the time paramedics arrived and Edward was rushed to the hospital, it was clear his brain had been without oxygen for far too long. That night, as the family gathered around his hospital bed, Edward was taken off life support. Sheck was left grappling with a heartbreaking reality. The brother he had tried so desperately to save was gone. Edward's death changed Sheck forever. The springs that had once seemed so inviting and filled with adventure now held a darker meaning, and he made a solemn promise to ensure that no other diver would suffer the same fate. It wasn't long after that he dedicated himself to transforming the sport of cave diving from a high-stakes hobby into a dedicated, safety-focused practice. Driven by the memory of his brother, he went on to publish Basic Cave Diving, a blueprint for survival, in 1979, a guidebook that would become essential reading for anyone daring to enter the world of cave diving. With time, Sheck would develop an almost mythical reputation. His unique physiology made him practically immune to nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep that could disorient and endanger even the most seasoned divers. Unlike others, he could plunge into unimaginable depths without experiencing decompression sickness, a life-threatening condition caused by nitrogen bubbles in the blood. This extraordinary ability allowed him to set record after record, reaching depths no other human had seen. But all of this, the accolades, the feats, the dives that defied human limits, would one day lead to a dive that even he might not return from. And that dive would take place in the Zacatón Sinkhole. The Zacatón cenote in northeastern Mexico isn't like other diving spots. It's a colossal, almost perfectly cylindrical pit, lined with sheer limestone walls and descending depths that seem to disappear into a darkness so thick it swallows light itself. It was here in this natural abyss that Sheck aimed to reach 1,000 feet, a record-breaking depth that had never been attempted by a human. In the year leading up to this dive, Sheck planned with almost military precision. Every detail, every possible risk was accounted for. This wasn't just another deep dive. It was an expedition into the unknown. He assembled a dedicated support team that included some of the best divers and experts of the time. His longtime friend, Jim Bowden, Ann Kirchhoff, Marcus Gray, and his wife Mary Ellen, and Karen, the wife of Jim. Together, they developed a strategy that involved a complex mix of gases, as diving to such extreme depths required far more than just oxygen and compressed air. To achieve his goal, Sheck would rely on 6 different gas mixtures and over 30 tanks strategically placed along his descent and ascent route. Each mixture was specifically chosen to combat intense pressure that would increase with every foot he descended. Sheck knew that the risks weren't limited to the descent. Coming back up would be a marathon on its own. The dive plan included a grueling 10-hour ascent, punctuated by 50 meticulously planned decompression stops, each one essential to avoid a fatal case of decompression sickness. As the team made their final checks on the morning of April 6, 1994, everyone knew what was at stake. It was one of those rare moments when the excitement and tension in the air were almost tangible, even among the seasoned divers who had faced danger countless times. Sheck had prepared for this day his entire life, yet there was a sense of solemnity as he suited up and glanced one last time at the team. The descent began at 9:45 a.m., with Sheck and Jim Bowden both slipping into the water, each with the same goal: push to 1,000 feet or as close as humanly possible. With each kick, they descended further into the murky blue depths, relying on their planned gas transition points. At 300 feet, they switched to a gas mix called Heli-Air, a blend of helium and air intended to reduce the risks of nitrogen narcosis. As they approached 600 feet, they moved to Trimix, a mixture engineered to maintain mental clarity and prevent narcosis from taking hold. Jim Bowden, one of the most experienced divers in the world, was no stranger to deep dives. Yet at around 750 feet, he began feeling the effects of high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS, a condition that can cause tremors, muscle spasms, and even intense feelings of anxiety. Still, he pushed on. But at 925 feet, his gas supply began to dwindle, and his regulator felt unreliable. He knew he had to make the difficult decision to turn back. As he began his ascent, struggling with both the equipment and the pressure's impact on his body, Jim cast one last look down into the darkness, expecting to see Sheck following the same path up, but all he saw was darkness. He surfaced, exhausted and shaken, but the team's attention was fixed on the water, waiting for Sheck to emerge. Time passed, and there were no signs of bubbles, no indication that Sheck was making his way back up. Minutes turned to hours, and a creeping sense of dread settled over the team. They knew Sheck's expertise, his commitment to careful planning, yet here they were, waiting, with nothing but silence from below. Eventually, divers would locate his body, still attached to the guide rope, tethered as though in a final act of forethought knowing he might not make it back alive. The cause of his death remains a topic of speculation, wrapped in mystery and the unforgiving nature of the deep. Some believe he may have experienced an acute HPNS event, losing control of his regulator. Others suggest an error in gas mixtures, a fatal oversight that could have led to hypoxia or other life-threatening conditions at such depth. And then there's the possibility that Sheck, ever the methodical planner, had deliberately attached himself to the rope, understanding the odds but hoping his body would one day be recovered as a message, a cautionary tale for those who might dare follow. Sheck's dive into the Zacatón Sinkhole was meant to be his final frontier, a crowning achievement to mark the end of an incredible career, but instead, it became a tragic reminder of the extreme dangers that come with venturing so far from the surface, where even the smallest error can prove fatal. Today, Sheck is remembered not only as a record-setting diver, but as a pioneer whose insights have become foundational to the sport. He's buried beside his brother, Edward, in Jacksonville, Florida, bringing his story full circle. The brothers' graves serve as a silent reminder of both the beauty of exploring the unknown